All right. As she's dying. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Vaginas and Vertebrae. I almost lost my train of thought and about said vertebrae and vaginas, which would have been a different way to say our podcast name. But anyways, I am Dr. Kaylee.
I'm Dr. Madeline.
And we are super pumped to talk to you today. We are actually bringing a question to the podcast today that we get asked quite frequently. And I think it is actually, when I did the research behind it, it's actually one of the most top searched questions about women's healthcare. And the question is, what is women's healthcare? You know, like the irony of that. But if you think about it, like, what is women's healthcare? People don't define what it is. We all just assume, in my personal opinion, that it's just treatment to women. And I think, you know, generally that is what it means, but there's so much more behind that. So we wanted to kind of bring on the episode, talk to you, because we did an episode not too long ago. I think it was our second one that was flipping women's healthcare upside down. And then we realized that was one of our best performing podcasts, but we also realized we didn't break down and define that for you guys, especially in our specific niche or niche, depending on where you're from. So Dr. Madeline, I don't know where you kind of want to go with that, but let me know, what are your thoughts? What are some things that we're trying to really promote or educate people on when it comes to what is women's health care?
Well, I know for me, and I know some of this is similar for you, is of course it deals with women, which women have different, I don't want to say issues, but just different things that they deal with versus a man, with different parts that work differently, all of that. But for me, a lot of it is empowering that woman in that process of feeling at home and connected in her body, so she understands when her body's trying to tell her maybe something is not 100% right, or she needs to dive in and get more information on what's going on, and then how she chooses that she wants to heal that or handle that moving forward, as well as not just physical but emotional as well, and mindset, right? It all plays a key role in all of that, and that it's going to change, that woman's going to change, I feel so much through her lifetime with her roles, especially if she chooses to become a parent at some point or a mom. There's just a lot of transition that happens with that motherhood transition. And then even if a woman decides not to do that, then there's still different things that change within that process and how our body responds. So
yeah, and I think it's important too to kind of just, what is the actual definition based on the dictionary? And I just looked this up before we got on the podcast here. And the definition is actually a branch of medical treatment that focuses on the diagnosis and conditions of women's physical and emotional well-being, which I was actually quite surprised about, because personally, being on both sides of the healthcare field as a patient and as a clinician, I don't feel that the emotional part is hit on enough, because if you think about the physiology of a woman, it is different than a man. We do have more emotions. We have a little bit more of the, hormones and things like that. And so to me, women's healthcare is very similar to what Dr. Madeline already said, but it's just and you can call me a feminist if you want to. I'm very in depth, and I'm really excited to treat women, because I personally feel that we are just we're unicorns, we're miracle workers. We can do so many things. Men can't birth a baby, they can't get a baby in their body, they can't grow a human being and bring it earthside. They can't do those things. They don't have the, I say pleasures because I'm working on my mindset around this, but they don't have the pleasure and the joy of being able to go through a menstrual cycle and what that truly means, and how do you connect with your body. Men don't have that. They don't have that high emotional intelligence like women typically do. And I will say typically, because I'm not talking about the sex changes, gender changes, things like that in this episode, but I'm just saying typically we are made physiologically to have more emotions. And that, for me, the big thing to go into women's healthcare was adding the empowerment and the advocacy to treating a woman in her physical dysfunction, but also understanding the whole transition emotionally and mentally and spiritually, and understanding how we react as a female, and how things like estrogen or testosterone or traumas, how all of those affect things. And I think it's just really important to understand that, even though it's called because I always get frustrated initially, because I was do I want to call myself a women's healthcare practitioner or a pelvic floor health practitioner? Because ultimately I do only treat women, but it's also, I feel that the term women's healthcare is confusing, because I mean, and I might just be like by myself over here thinking, but shouldn't healthcare be inclusive of spiritual, mental, and emotional for males and females and kids and like the elderly and like everything? Like, shouldn't that be healthcare?
Yeah, it should be healthcare.
Yeah.
For sure. And it should
Yeah.
be, I think, too, more in like a state where it's not just waiting essentially for them to be at a diagnosis. There should be more wellness care that's talked about in that, and how to support them in that process and that continuum to not even move them to where there's a diagnosis. But in our healthcare, we wait and we wait and we wait and we wait and we wait.
Mhm. Yeah. And also, like, where's the preventative medicine in that? Like, you know, that definition, where is the wellness? Where is the prevention? Where is the labor and delivery, like education and like understanding? Like, I saw something really cool actually on Facebook the other day, that there is a woman in the area and she's a pregnancy coach. And I love that term. Like, how cool is it to actually have a job to be able to walk someone through that stage of life, right? And so I think of myself as a lot of like a pelvic floor coach in a sense of like educating and coaching and doing all of these things. But I just think it's really fascinating to understand that unfortunately society does not add in my opinion, but I also think most people agree with me, enough of the proper type of care for women, because we get treated like men. And it's not that men don't need health care, but we get treated like men. They don't take into account the physiological differences. They don't take into account the emotional state. They don't take into account, you know, like during breastfeeding, things are different. They don't take into account all of the hormone changes. A lot of times it's like pulling teeth to get a hormone panel for a client, or being able to send them out to say, you know, a lot of vaginal dryness, things like that, for instance, is something I refer out for that a lot. I get told no all the time, that they don't need it. And that baffles me, because it's just like we are doing such a disservice in the healthcare field when it comes to women, because we are ignoring the most important parts of how our body functions.
Yeah. I mean, we see it all the time. I'm sure you see it with your postpartum moms too, that are coming in with autoimmune conditions that popped up postpartum after their pregnancy, and they go to a doctor and it's like, well, you either have autoimmune or you don't. Like, not what, it's not like, most of them aren't asking you like, did you just have a baby? Is this your second time postpartum in the last 5 years? Like, that you were breastfeeding, like you have these nutritional deficiencies and different stressors that lead to that. But like, most doctors aren't asking about that or even considering that, which is a disservice to the patient.
Yeah. And then like the questions that you go to a regular doctor, like an MD, and nobody's asking about like pain with sex. Nobody's asking about our emotional health. They're not asking about like urinary incontinence or back pain, for instance, or like breast pain, things like that. We go for like a yearly checkup, and then we're just expected that like everything's going to be normal after that. And that makes me personally as a woman feel, before I got into the healthcare field, that would make me feel like it wasn't okay to speak up about problems that happened within that year range. So if I saw like a different color discharge, or if I had pain with sex after a pap smear and it came back normal, I was just like, oh, well, it's all in my head, because that's how it was made to feel. So it's just like, it's really frustrating sometimes for those of us that are working in the healthcare field. And I'm sure Dr. Madeline can kind of say the same, because it's hard for us to advocate against something that's been like this for so long. And so when we were talking in our episode about flipping women's healthcare upside down, it's really obvious that we are very passionate about what we do and that we truly only want to help women. But it's also a very difficult thing. And I don't know of any other like colleague of mine that is male that deals with as much emotional stress from like helping people that I do, because I feel like emotionally in tune too. But part of that's because I'm female, and it's also part of because of how much passion I have. So it's just interesting to me to see that. And like when I get asked that, because people ask me all the time, like, what is a women's healthcare professional?
Yeah.
You know, and it's just like the easy answer is someone that treats women. But the answer that I would like to say is someone that empowers and advocates for a woman fully through physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health. Yeah. And all transitions of life, because I think that it's interesting where a lot of people will only think things happen during pregnancy, or they only think things happen during postpartum era, or they only think that it's okay to have, I don't know, sex after a certain age. Like, we're shamed for sex. We have vaginal shaming going on, like all of these things occurring. And it's just, I don't hear about that. Like, men talk about sex all the hell they like, all they want. They talk about porn, they talk about masturbation. Nobody gets upset about it. And then when a woman brings it up, it's just like, what the hell are you talking about? And I'm just like, excuse me. Did you know that we are the only beings that have an organ called the clitoris, that the only function of that is to have pleasure? I think that we are pretty magical. So hello, I could go down a rabbit hole there. I told Dr. Madeline before we got on here, I was like, I'm taking notes that I don't go down a rabbit hole. But
I think she has a note that says no rabbit holes on her computer screen today.
I do. Actually, I was like, don't go down rabbit holes. I don't think that was too big of a rabbit hole, but I could talk about the clitoris all day long. I love that thing. It's just really interesting because it's like and you guys can all probably hear my voice when I say these things because I get frustrated. But I don't get frustrated at my clients, so please don't ever take it that way. I get frustrated at the lack of care and compassion for women in the healthcare system, not just where I am, but in the country. And I talk to people from all over the world all the time because I do a lot of things online. And in like other countries, it is like very known that a woman gets a year of postpartum leave, or they get physical therapy is covered, pelvic floor during pregnancy, during birth and delivery, like postpartum, all of that's covered under insurance. They don't deal with the things that we deal with. They don't have the pressure for the pre-baby body back. Because if you think about it, they understand that, not like giving any specific like region or anything like that, because of course there's cultural and religious differences, but a lot of people in other countries understand the importance of a woman. Like the woman is kind of a queen in those sense. So why are we not considered queens here?
Great question.
You know, because it's just like we are such a fascinating like species, and it's such a beautiful thing, and I love studying women. And I will say honestly, like pelvic floor related, there's not a whole lot of anatomical difference as far as like just anatomy goes when it comes to pelvic floor, genitalia, things like that, but the reproductive system itself is just amazing. And then we've got all of the hormones, we've got all of the different things like that. We don't have external genitalia, so we have like a full bowl there like between our legs, and it's just a fascinating thing to think about. And it's just really hard for me to know, like very frequently, usually weekly, I get a client that comes in and tells me the same thing. Like, I've been going through this for a very long time, and everybody keeps telling me it's in my head, or I'm crazy, or it's not as bad as I think.
I've heard that time and time again from our women patients. Like, even if it's not pregnancy or postpartum related, just related to their body. Like, talking about women having that like special, I think their intuition is a lot stronger than a man's, and it's a little bit different and special. And if the woman is in tune to that, she knows that. And she goes to a doctor and she's like, I just like something's not right. And the doctor's like, your labs came back fine. You're fine. Or, you know, or I know you've said it many times, especially for pelvic floor issues, well, it's all in your head or something like that. And you're like, you just like I'm done with you. Like, that's it. Like,
yeah. Yeah, and it's really frustrating because then, you know, you have to be able to be strong enough in your mental health, which is something that women are not taught when we're young. I personally don't know of many of my friends or colleagues that grew up in a way that it was okay to embrace that part of you, like your emotions. It was like, for me, it wasn't okay to cry. It wasn't okay to complain. It wasn't okay to do those things. And so when I became an adult, I was that one that would hide all of those emotions. And so when I went through all of the things that I went through that required me to go and see a doctor, that doctor telling me it was in my head and that I was making all these things up, like when I heard that, it was kind of like, and I know this sounds kind of morbid, but it was almost like they were validating what I already thought I knew. You know what I mean? Oh, right. Oh, there you are. Sorry. Like Dr. Madeline was in slow-mo, and it was really kind of interesting because she was like flipping her head, and it was, anyways, so it was slow-mo, Darth Vader. Now she's frozen. Are you still there though? Nope. Hello. Oh no. There you are. I hear you. Oh my goodness, you're in Darth Vader mode again.
Okay. It shows that I have internet.
Okay, I can hear you. Yeah, I have all range. It says excellent on mine, so I don't know what this is about. So those of you that are watching on YouTube this video, Dr. Madeline is frozen in a very intriguing face. So anyways, we will continue talking, but we were talking about, you know, like the frustration it is. Like, I think women, because I talk to my husband about this a lot, and I talk to my brothers, and I talk to men about this a lot, and husbands of wives, things like that. It fascinates men to understand, like during the delivery phase of like when a woman is giving birth, like it fascinates them. And then that's when they realize like, oh, you can do a lot as a female. Like, it is pretty freaking magnificent when they get that realization, like, oh shit, like, this is amazing. I can't believe that happens. And I tell my clients a lot during pregnancy specifically, and postpartum even, when we're having a hard time adjusting to this postpartum era, think about a very small hole and how large that has to go. You know, and I tell people, look at your cervix, like, measurement thing. Look it up on the internet if you need to, but look at what an 8 centimeter dilated cervix, like, look at how big that actually is. It is fascinating what happens. And if you're interested in those things, like, reading about this is just amazing on, like, even during a period, what type of hormone is released, and like your body knows exactly when to release that hormone. And if you're on birth control, like, what's blocking, what's not blocking, like, how are pills related to hormones, and like, how are you, you know, it's just so fascinating. And then anxiety and stress, how is that related to cortisol? How is that related to progesterone? Like, all of these things. And it's just, a woman is literally like, it's just a miracle of a human being. And it is just a beautiful thing to watch and learn about. And I become continuously frustrated when I see that they are being, I wouldn't say mistreated, I would say more so neglected, and led to believe that they are not allowed to have a feeling around what's going on. And, you know, like, in my line of work, I work with a lot of very intimate issues and a lot of things that make people feel very upset and overwhelmed and saddened. And so it's just like, where is the care and the compassion for that?
Right. I agree. I see it so much in our, especially in our pregnant and postpartum moms that come in and they're just not empowered to go through their birth. They're not empowered postpartum. They're scared. They're not being listened to. And then, like, lead that into, like, having a baby or a child, and you having that mother intuition, and you're not believing what the doctor's saying to you about them, and their options are not to listen to you, give them meds that they don't need. Like, how many times have we heard of people taking antibiotics who don't even have a bacterial infection, but they're just given the antibiotics? Very fired up about this.
Yeah. Yeah, and I get that a lot with a, I wouldn't say not necessarily like a misdiagnosis, but a lot of times they will,
and, you know, can you hear me?
I can now. This is a very interesting connection. I apologize to all of our listeners. I will have to re-listen and make sure I edit out these things, I guess, Dr. Madeline, because it's just interesting, which is weird because I think we both have, like, excellent internet connection. So weird. Anyways, you were going on a rant about antibiotics, but you sound like Darth Vader. Oh my God.
Okay, great. Awesome. Wow. I don't know. I mean, I do know, but I don't know why this is doing that. But yeah, I was funny. I was talking to my sister the other day, and it was just talking about, like, actually speaking up and being more proactive about talking about this stuff, because if we're not sharing our story and how we approach and help patients, like, you can't assume someone else is. And as much as I'm like, well, I try to play nice in the corner over here as the chiropractor, there is a different way of life out there. There's a life without medication, and always turning to that. Not that there's a time and place for medication depending on you specifically and what's going on in emergency medicine, but it is by all means overprescribed for stuff, shit it doesn't need to be prescribed for when lifestyle changes. And nobody's even listening to the patient on how they feel about it or giving them any other options. And it's just crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I run into that a ton with diagnosis. Like, one of the ones that pops in my head that I just had like 4 evals on this past week is bacterial vaginosis and recurrent, like, urinary tract infections or recurrent yeast infections that are not even being cultured or urine sampled. They're just given the medication because it sounds like that. And again, you know, it's not, we're tailoring this podcast around clients so that you can understand that you have other options and other choices. Not all medical professionals are only going to prescribe a medication, but we need to find you one that's going to listen to your symptoms and then also figure out a quantitative way to figure out how to treat that symptom. So, like, you know, recurrent UTIs, a lot of times in my line of work, recurrent yeast infections is an underlying pelvic floor dysfunction, and my clients get better after treatment. And then all of these years and thousands of dollars that we've spent on all of this medication that only made our immune system sickened. Like, hello, we need to, like, talk about these things. We need to have these discussions. And it's just, incredibly important that you're informed about these things so that you know what questions to ask, and so that you also understand that it doesn't have to be like a one and done like thing. So when you're going into a medical doctor, a gynecologist, an OBGYN, things like that, like of course they're looking for more of a condition or a diagnosis per se, whereas there are some of us out here who are looking to base it off of your symptoms and help you to eliminate those symptoms. And it's important that you're informed on that, and in your area, understanding that hopefully there are people in the area that are willing to help you with that. So yeah, it's super important to understand that we need to speak up, we need to tell our stories, which is a really great idea. If you all head over to my website at femempower.org, I'm adding, as we're speaking right now, adding a section there that if you want to be interviewed on our podcast, if you want to tell your story, we would be more than happy to add you into our list. We have so many people that have such magnificent stories. Like I wish every single one of my clients would eventually get to the point where they feel confident telling that. And I'm sure Dr. Madeline feels the same, because you don't know the impact that you would have by telling someone your experience in women's healthcare, what that experience looked like, what you were told, what you did, what that like resulted in. And then like we can help you find a way to get better care, or if you got good care, how to prevent that from coming back, or how to add preventative medicine or wellness into those things. And it's just important that you're informed and you understand those things, and that you always reach out and ask your healthcare professionals those right questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's all I have on my end over here about what is women's health care. And I'm super excited that you all stayed to the end of this. We are still having our launch party on January 15th at 6:30 p.m. Eastern in St. Petersburg at Atlas Chiropractic Center. We will be having this online. There will be the option, of course, if you want the video to understand more so about what we're going to be sharing, what we're going to be talking about, we'd be more than happy to do that. So many cool things coming in 2020. If you ever have an idea of what you want us to talk about topic-wise, or if you want to be on the podcast, please do not hesitate to reach out. Let us know. Tell us, hey, loving what you're doing, would love to be a part of it. We would love that. So until next time, thank you so much for coming on to the episode, and we will see you next week.